chicken or crow, crossing the road.
So the problem with rookie wide receiver evaluation right now, to catch you up, is ranking. Not how do we find them, how do we group them, how do we describe them, how do we use the simple stats that we have to identify who's good, who's bad, who did well, who did poorly in their individual situation. I think we can do that really well. Really well. In the Dynasty Crossroads a couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast about what productive looks like. And I tried to explain using the NFL as proxy, something more familiar for most people, how the percentage of your team's offense really easily and very clearly tells us who is a huge part of a team's offense and who is a poor part of a team's offense, and how easily that divides players, very simply, not where we need it to be to hit an over 50%, which is the only place we're trying to get, but very clearly articulates who's good, who's bad, who's productive, who's not. Now, I also try to point out that there are some players in that not category that, with more context, you could see would be wrong to write off. Like, I'm not a big fan of McCall Hardman, but judging him against Allen Robinson last year in the NFL would be poor process, right? He's a rookie versus a young and talented veteran. We don't know where McCall Hardman's career is going. So more context breathes more life into some of those, into the non-productive. And that's how the productive or good category gets filled with so many players that it's hard to know who to draft. But it's often easy to write off some. Now, I've been doing this with Henry Ruggs from Alabama recently, and he's someone rumored to get first-round draft capital. But that doesn't scare me. Draft capital is the single most important thing in a rookie wide receiver's profile. Marginally more important than how productive relative to their age they were in college. Combined, that's a ticket. But I think this is why I like prospect evaluation. For the most part, in Dynasty or redraft, the smart play is always the best play. And it's not fun sometimes. Like, sometimes this is a game I'm playing just for fun. With prospect evaluation, you get to take that 1 in a million shot. So I get liking someone like Henry Ruggs. But I don't think people realize that if you don't like Henry Ruggs and he gets first-round draft capital, that's also a 1 in a million shot because draft capital is so important. So I'm using something I think has significant signal that's helped me get over 50% of getting a bust or a hit right, relatively, over the last few years, to try and take $1 million shot that the NFL's got something wrong. Sometimes I try and add in more context for myself. Like I find myself watching Philip Dorsett highlights to remind myself that I can't identify from watching who's good and who's bad. Philip Dorsett looks like a good player in his rookie year to me. I'm sorry, if you watch a highlight reel, you're like, man, that guy's going to do something. And I have to watch it occasionally to recognize that I'm not going to be able to fill in the blanks that way. Some people are, and they're worth following that way, and lots of them, like Henry Ruggs, but they can't provide context as to why. They can't tell me this particular skill that they're looking at elevates him, because it typically always elevates a player with lower production. It's not counted, and all counting does is let you compare it. It's like yards. I know who's got more and who's got less yards, and I know how many people who've got less yards then become successful in the NFL, and it just helps me to fill in the story. It helps me to get that context I need to know how to value something that we observe. People watching Henry Ruggs are doing it internally. They've got a large stock, a database in their head, essentially, of having watched X amount of prospects, and they know football, and they're very good at what they do. It's hard for me to know how to value it. So I can, and that's just me. That's not talking about some of the really good guys in this industry or this really good statistics-based fellas who can really describe and produce a model that accurately ranks players. But I can do the other thing. I can get them into the right groups. I can tell you who's more or less productive, and the right names almost always surface into above the fold. Always, actually, above the fold, even in my pre-draft model. The problem is ranking them. Production doesn't rank well. Jordan Matthews hit the top of my 2014 draft class in every way that I tested. He was the most productive in his situation, and it wasn't like a lower conference situation either. He was fairly high competition level. But you wanted Odell Beckham. I actually ranked it right. But that's the thing. The models I've got can do a really good job narrowing the field, telling us who's good, who's more likely to be good in the NFL. And that's just my crappy models, my production score. But ranking them, I still require putting the context together. So I've been fishing for something, one, to address lots of questions I get about competition level with my production metrics and the database that I've got for you all. Again, I'll put it in the description. But also, I'm always seeking for something that adjusts, not improves how well it describes how productive they are. That I got. I know how productive they were in their situation. I know how to compare those situations. But ranking it accurately, is Jalen Reagor getting, for example, because I think he's someone I want to talk about today. Jalen Reagor's teammates, for example, the top three combined, got 17.6% of their team's MS receiving yards. So the market share of receiving yards, 17% were going to the top three. He was obviously the number one ranked in market share of receiving yards in his last season. Conference expectation is about 19% for the top three, so it's a little low. So with that kind of information, I'm able to create a teammate score with the top three, the other players in the top three on their team in terms of how much they were dominating that offense in their last year compared to conference average. So it's comparing it within its situation. So this is one, at least a start, I hope, of me trying to find something else to add to what we already have to rank players more accurately within tier groups. I also wanted to highlight today, by the way, receiving yards per team pass attempt in these two columns. They're really useful stats. They, by themselves, almost have as enough signal as any one of the things I've worked diligently to create, and that's a simple division that everyone can do. So I've just included, one, the data to do that, and also their best and last years. These are both important columns when providing context on the efficiency that a player was putting up in their best and last season for efficiency, essentially. Alright, so Jalen Reagor's teammates, under the teammate score, I've got it highlighted here in orange, and this one's highlighted in yellow to point out that I've got this sheet ranked by the pre-draft model. That's what's determining the order right now. So looking at the 2020 class, you can see that Jalen Reagor's teammates were 2% less of their offense than you would expect in the Big 12 conference. You can roll that over to looking to what he did in his last year. Now, what I actually have in the main database is the average share over expected market share of receiving yards. So for this sheet where I've created an extra one just to show you what's going on with that, I've determined them as ASEX and LSEX, last year and average. Okay, the average is what you have in the database as it is. The last year is easy to create. This is like, I also got this question. I was looking at seniors the other day and someone said this column isn't in the database. No, it's not, because I have to limit the columns at this point. There are 136 columns wide right now. And having looked at a lot of statistics websites, us nerds aren't very good at marketing, apparently. Like, Player Profiler is the exception. Most nerd sites look like a wall of data, no way to download it, so that a nerd like me who's interested in a wall of data can do anything with it. And we have no interest in data that you can't test, that you can't explore, that you can't. So what's the point in having it if you can't get it? I get that data should be protected and everything, but in that case, if you want to hold on to your data, don't present a wall of data, a wall of tiny numbers, because no one who doesn't want to download data is interested in a wall of tiny numbers. You present a nice, pretty page like Player Profiler does with very simple, clear visualizations that tell you about those numbers. So it's one or the other. I go nerd heavy or go, mass market heavy. And I appreciate both because I'm kind of both guys. But do one or the other. My database is just for me, but people are interested in, and some people want to check me, they want to wreck me, they want to test my own scores, make their own, and challenge mine because they disagree with my ranks or whatever. And that's why I started putting it out. Here's all the data I'm using. I've tried to make it pretty, but there are 136 columns. This is a wall of data, not pretty visualizations, and therefore I make it downloadable. So anyone who wants to engage in it on a statistical level can do that. But even said that, most of my nerd friends will also say that's way too much. That's just way too much. It's all-consuming to look at 136 columns of data when you don't know what some of the abbreviations are, and you've got to go to another tab to figure out what my crappy abbreviations mean. I get it. So I try to limit columns. I'm trying to make it simple. That's why I have this new metrics and models section at the very start of all the player pages in green to tell you these are the things I've made, these are the things I'm mostly talking about when I'm evaluating a prospect, and to the right of that is all the raw stats, the percentage of this, the percentage of that, literal counting stats in terms of how many receiving touchdowns they had, and across the top is their age. So if you want to get more complicated, you can keep scanning. And if you want to test stuff, that's why I include the NFL career marks, because you got to test it against something that happens in the NFL. I'm using average points per game. I do think I need something else. Someone was criticizing average points per game before. It does a pretty good job if you rank the NFL players in their draft classes by average points per game for 3 years. You pretty much get the exact right order. So I think it's actually okay. But I think another measure, it might be the measure I'm using that's struggling to help me rank. So I want to explore that too. It was an interesting point. And also combine data. And if my crappy database has value. This is an awesome database. I'm crappy, database is awesome. It's that I combine NFL, combine, and college stats because that's the bear, okay? Because all these websites everywhere have different names, different syntax, so combining the numbers is actually the more difficult bit. Being able to line up Tyler Johnson's market share receiving age 20 with his combine number is actually the part that's actually a little difficult to get from any website I can find, and that's why I started building it. Yeah, and then plus his NFL career mark, so I could see how they relate. But anyway, I'm talking about the database a little bit too much here. So, yeah, the years column isn't in there, but it's really easy to make. If you're someone that likes to download and explore, it's a simple sum column, or even a count column, and then just select, games played, for example, and it's going to tell you how many ages he has data for, and I'll come up with 4, right? So it's really easy to make, really easy to see, and you can get it everywhere. If you don't want to do that, go to sports-reference.com, right, where most of this data comes from anyway, and you can see which class and how many years they played. So, or you can just make it. I'm just trying to limit columns, which is also why I only put the average in the database as opposed to the last year. But I did want to talk about the last year for this, so I wanted to mention it a little bit. So actually, I should point out, these columns don't exist in the database you can go and download. You can make them from the database if you were interested, but they're not in there because I already have 136 columns, and I'm trying not to be that idiot who doesn't realize most people aren't going to be able to enjoy looking through something with so much data. I'm trying to simplify. But anyway, so the TeamMate score that you can find in the database. Sorry, you're here now. I forget. I keep trying to look over here. What that tells you, and this is why I've got crappy headings to my title. I'm trying to literally describe it so you don't have to go to another tab to find out what the hell this thing is. Is TeamMate overexpected in the last year? So TeamMate score is literally looking at the players last year, judging the percentage of the offense the top 3 options on that offense have. And as I said, in the case of Tyler Johnson, for example, the top 3 were averaging 29.3% of the team's receiving yards. Conference expectation over the last 5 years in the Big Ten for Tyler Johnson is about 20. So they're actually 9% over expectation. Now, what happens when you dig into Tyler Johnson a little bit more, you find Rashad Bateman, who is actually the wide receiver 1 in market share receiving yards last year. So Tyler Johnson actually fell to the wide receiver 2 in his own offense in terms of the percentage of the team's yards that he was creating. And that's what TeamMate score is telling us. There's someone or someone's else on the team that is competing significantly for a piece of that pie. So a positive number tells you that his teammates were high competition for yards. They were sucking up a big pile of yards as well. And in Tyler Johnson's case, Rashad Bateman, as Ray mentioned on the podcast when he came on, really good. Really good, really young as well. He's the top rookie of profile for the next year's presumed class. Like, we don't know if he's going to declare. Maybe he'll pull a Tyler Johnson. So that's what it's meant to say. A negative value in the case of Jalen Reagor, teammate score, says that the top 3 were actually under-expected for the conference, so he was perhaps, only in his last year, getting less competition for those yards than Tyler Johnson on his offense. Now, the reason I've made this is try to find something, again, the only reason I make anything these days is try to find something that helps rank the stats that we already have that we know are actually pretty good at describing and explaining and also predicting players' average points per game through the first 3 years. I just want to get something that adjusts a little bit better, that says that Cortland Sutton and A.J. Brown, 2 players I really had to dig into to make sure I didn't get wrong, and I didn't get them wrong in my ranks, but the models themselves were like, I don't know about this guy. Top of the fold, but maybe take a closer look kind of territory, and I did, and so I moved them up in my ranks. But they were in a better conference, they were in a tighter situation than other players who were simply just dominating, frankly. N'Keal Harry, Andy Isabella, J.J. Sega-Whiteside. I needed to tell the story to make sure I got Cortland Sutton and A.J. Brown in the right place in my ranks. My models aren't ranking engines. They're the beginnings of my ranks, but I adjust based on more context, more information, both from reading and listening to people that are able to watch these players and distinguish traits that I'm not able to. That's why I watch Philip Dorsett's tape, just to remind myself I'm incapable of it. And teammate score is hopefully going to help with that, but if it's a good descriptive number, I might be able to use it statistically to adjust the model. So far, I haven't found a way. Right now, it's just an interesting descriptive stat that tells us that Tyler Johnson's top 3, he had significant competition in his own team. Jalen Reagor didn't. Now, I did want to make one note here. To do this, to track their last year, what I've had to do is rank them in terms of, if they had the most, the second most, the third most of their team's receiving yards, and then create the expectation for that. So the reason Tyler Johnson, for example, looks so high, and that's why I've started using the average for the database. He looks like 18% higher than the average in his last year, but he's ranked as a number 2 in his offense. And the reason he's a number 2 is because the number 1 last year just happened to be really impressive. This also happened with Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry was actually the wide receiver 1 in market share receiving yards in their last year. Odell Beckham was the number 2. It's kind of a distorted view when you get players that good playing at the number 2. They're just going to stretch the curve too far, if you were looking at it on a graph. And so instead I've started using average and putting that in the database. That's what S/EX is for the database, the share over expected, because the average is it doesn't get distorted by 1 year distinction. Being second on your offense in the last year is nothing to worry about. I mean, Odell Beckham did it. And plenty of good players just happened that were in situations where there were other good NFL players on their teams, which does happen from time to time, get ranked second. But I mean, the ranking means nothing when you're already 18% over what most players do in your conference. Being second on the team doesn't mean anything. So don't get too tilted when you see someone ranked second. Now, Henry Ruggs ranked third, maybe, but more context is always key. So that's what teammate score does. How am I using it to tell a story? I want to tell you about everything every time I start talking about this. That's my problem, and I can't, because I'm trying to keep these videos short, simple, interesting. So, and I'm also trying to get better at this, so make clickbait, or I'm never going to be good at this. All right, how do I use it to tell the story? Right here you see that CeeDee Lamb is ranked 4th in my model, pre-draft model. It's kind of shitty, but the best I can do right now. And it does accurately describe that these guys, all the way to here, were productive. They look significantly interesting based on what they did in college. And again, you can see them again. Just go download the database, it's yours. Well, it's your copy. So, why CeeDee Lamb first in my ranks? One, because I know people like him. I know he's looking more impressive on tape, right? I don't want that to lead me too far down the road, but I know CeeDee Lamb's locked in for good draft capital. I do know things that I can't ignore that I know when I'm ranking. Like Tyler Johnson's meant to be a day 3 pick, maybe. Productive or not, he can't stay at the top when I start ranking this class. Jalen Reagor second, though. And he's not someone getting a lot of dings. So how does Lamb climb above Reagor? And it's not because Tyler Johnson and Edwards are seniors. As I mentioned on the podcast I just dropped, the senior thing doesn't do it for me. Well, one thing that I've been looking at lately, because people are suggesting that Henry Ruggs has stiffer competition than Odell Beckham, and that's why he got less yards in a competitive situation, which is not true. When I counted it, TeamMate score explains that that's not true. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry represented a more difficult challenge to each other, if it's a challenge at all when there's another good player on the offense. I'm not convinced it is, but if it is, those two are sucking up more of their offense than all 3 of the players on Alabama. So those Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, if target suck is a thing, and I don't think it is, but if it is, Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham were still able to triple the production of Henry Ruggs at every age, with higher level of competition for opportunity than they had in Alabama last year. So, I mean, even if that's true, he should still have done a little bit more. He might still be good. And like, first round draft capital is going to make me have to pay attention to him, but I don't think that excuse works when you look at past examples. But anyway. So, how does CeeDee Lamb get over Jalen Reagor? Putting the story together, Reagor and Lamb both had teammates that weren't as competitive for targets or receiving yards in their own offense. Their teammate score is 2 or 3% below average for their conference, so the top 3 weren't competitive. And yet when we look at what they did with that, Jalen Reagor with 3% under the conference average in his last year for market share and receiving yards. The conference average is 28% for the wide receiver 1 on a team's offense in the Big 12. CeeDee Lamb's also in the Big 12, so he has the same expectation as the number 1 on the offense. But Jalen Reagor had 25%, CeeDee Lamb had 31%. So CeeDee Lamb's climbing over the average with almost no competition, significant competition for receiving yards, where Jalen Reagor has fallen under it. That's it. That's the statistical argument for how you can identify Lamb over Reagor. So this is the problem with Jalen Reagor, which would make a great clickbait title, right? This is a statistical problem with Jalen Reagor, but this isn't predictive. It's descriptive. It helps me identify why CeeDee Lamb definitely looks better than Jalen Reagor. He's a bigger part of the offense, and the most important year for most people is considering their last year, when really I think we should be looking at the average or age adjusted. And he's a smaller part of his offense in that last year, even compared to the conference average. Now, Jalen Reagor crossed this threshold easily the year before that, and if you look at how old he was when he was producing, like with CeeDee Lamb, my pre-draft model is telling you here, Reagor actually looks better because he was doing more of his team's offense at age 18, 19. And then in the last year, they were both over the average, but CeeDee Lamb was significantly over the conference average for wide receiver 1s in terms of percentage of his team's offense. Both were over the age average for successful NFL players, which is why they both look good. So adding the context in, you can see why CeeDee Lamb's looking better, people like him more, and his production does hint to us that CeeDee Lamb should be over Jalen Reagor. So the problem with Jalen Reagor is that he was underproductive compared to his conference average in his last year. It's a very, very slight ding. It's actually a lie. If I title this video The Problem with Jalen Reagor, the only real problem with Jalen Reagor is that you're only going to get to draft him once. That's the problem with Jalen Reagor. That's the only problem with Jalen Reagor. But if we're comparing them to someone like CeeDee Lamb, both of them have almost everything you want on a statistical profile from college, apart from this one little thing, where CeeDee Lamb did better in his final year compared to the conference average. Not because he just had a higher percentage of yards, but they were playing in the same conference, so they have this similar expectation for how much good players should dominate. Well, that's the theory. All right. So that's teammate score. That's average share over expected, and that's a potential problem with Jalen Reagor. I really don't think it's a problem, but it's enough. It's interesting enough that I'm comfortable putting CeeDee Lamb over Reagor right now. We'll see how the draft works out. Outside of that, they both got it. Yeah, they both pretty much couldn't have a better profile, so no complaints, and it's actually a lie. I'm going to suck at YouTube if I can't stick to my clickbait, but there you go. Alright guys, I'm going to get out of here. Check out Teammate Score if you're interested in it. Use it to put together a story, not to sort by and then, oh, this player's obviously better than that player. I think it helps provide context. I don't think it helps do that. Alright, I'm out of here. Thanks again. Talk to you later. Have fun.